afternoon, it's Tom and Ross with more wrestling news. Just as we're getting used to this new way of doing things, we come to you with some pretty horrible wrestling news. And let's cut to the chase and get straight to the headlines. WWE Hall of Famer Pat Patterson has passed away. Find out why WWE talent were reprimanded at Survivor Series. And we have an update on former Raw Underground stars. We'll get to that in a bit. But first of all, we start with the news that broke just about an hour ago via Twitter. Tony Marinara putting out a tweet saying, just got a text from my buddy Roger Roulotte letting me know that legendary wrestler Pat Patterson of WWE passed away earlier this morning in a Miami hospital. Patterson had cancer. He was 79. Thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. This is devastating news, Ross.
Yeah, I mean, words like icon, legend, he's part of wrestling folklore, the first ever Intercontinental Champion. You hear any sort of wrestler who was around in the 80s and 90s and they speak about who was the best guy for a finish. It was always Pat Patterson in the producing role going, here's how you should finish this matchup to get the best reaction. You think about the concept of the Royal Rumble. He was the guy who apparently brought that to the table. You hear about all the stories of him and Vince McMahon and Jim Ross and Jim Cornette and Vince Russo sitting around the pool, pushing Shane McMahon into the water, having a good laugh, coming up with all these storylines that we saw in the 80s and 90s, and just his impact on the professional wrestling business, it can't be understated, can it?
An incredible wrestling mind who was born in France, arrived in the US in 1962, didn't speak a word of English when he arrived in America, and immediately started making an impact. Killer Pat Patterson, as well as an amazing tour with in New Japan against Antonio Inoki. But we remember him for his run as part of the WWF. It was in 1979 that the Intercontinental Championship was introduced via a tournament. We have to do the bunny rabbit ears. If this was a tweet, they would say it would be a little blue line along the bottom. A tournament that took place in Rio de Janeiro. It's one of my favourite bits of wrestling folklore, this tournament for the IC title.
What is the true story, Tom, as far as you're aware?
I think he was just given the belt.
Yeah,
no, what we're talking about, it was a real tournament. WWE did a whole thing on April Fool's Day, like breaking down how Pat Patterson fought through like 487 other competitors to become the first Intercontinental Champion in Rio.
As he should do to win such a prestigious title, by the way.
Absolutely. It's something they had so much fun with over the years. Like we talked there about his time as one of the Stooges. A lot of people who grew up with wrestling over the last 20 years will know Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe as just the bulk and skull of the WWF Attitude Era, weren't they?
It's something you really do. It's like William Regal. When you're young, because as I was young during the Attitude Era when that sort of stuff was going down, you don't truly appreciate it until you grow up a bit and you mature a bit and you realise just how effective they were in that role being Vince McMahon Stooges. It was just really like basic stuff at its concept, but they pulled it off to a T.
The big one behind the scenes, obviously with Pat Patterson, who was a big part of the growth of the WWF. We can't not talk about Pat Patterson and not talk about the Royal Rumble, which was a match that Pat Patterson was the mind behind.
That is going to be the lasting legacy, isn't it? Yes, we could. Obviously, I think we haven't mentioned it yet so far. I think he was the first openly gay professional wrestler at that sort of level, which we can't obviously not mention as well. But I think the lasting legacy will be the guy who came up with the Royal Rumble, a concept of a match that has truly stood the test of time and looks like it will stand the test of time forevermore, because still the Royal Rumble is always my highlight. When you're looking forward to a pay-per-view in a calendar year of WWE's pay-per-views, it's always the one you look forward to the most. It is for me anyway.
You talk about him becoming the first openly gay wrestler, and he came out in the early 1970s, but it wasn't acknowledged on WWE TV or programming until 2014 when he was on Legends House, and he talked openly about his partner of 40 years that passed away in 1998. So in many senses, like whether it's a fictional tournament in Rio de Janeiro, whether it is a match concept that many believe is the greatest wrestling match every single year, to being somebody that was openly gay during a time when it wasn't the done thing. In every sense, Pat Patterson is a trailblazer.
That's the word, isn't it? Trailblazer. I don't know how else you can sum it any better, Tom.
Amazing. We send our love and our best wishes to the friends and family of the late, great WWE Hall of Famer, Pat Patterson. Moving on to some other bits of wrestling news for today. We talked earlier on about heat with WWE talent and Bruce Pritchard. And there's been a bit of heat between The Office and The Boys for some time, and it continued at Survivor Series. This comes from PW Insider, who say one edict that has been strictly enforced as of late is time cues for broadcasts. There was actually a number of talent who were reprimanded for going over time in recent weeks at the Survivor Series pay-per-view and subsequent TV shows. There is also heat falling on some producers if their segments end up going over. Ross, do you notice that quite a few things on WWE TV tend to go a bit long?
Sometimes, Tom, painfully so, with certain segments. You just wish they would end a lot sooner. But to the naked eye, as you sit there as a fan just watching the shows, you don't notice it, do you? The thing when you mentioned time restrictions there that comes to my mind was All In. When people went over time massively there. And we didn't realise at the time, did we? Obviously, the main event on that show, this is completely unrelated, but this is where my mind went to. The main event on that show felt really, 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 really rushed. And then it came out afterwards that people had gone over the time constraints. So it's something people need to stick to for the betterment of the show, so everyone gets their fair crack at the old proverbial whip. And if people are going over time, rightfully so, they are getting reprimanded.
I find it funny that this is the year where we're hearing of people getting told off for going long, because I think WWE pay-per-views have been the shortest they've ever been. We had up until the pandemic hit, we had standard B-show pay-per-views that would go 4 hours because everybody would try and get guys in from all the brands to do stuff. We had Money in the Bank back earlier in the year that barely went 2.5 hours. Now, as a wrestling fan in the UK, as yourself, Ross, I love that because you know what? You're in bed at a decent time after staying up late to watch a pay-per-view. But it's just funny how of all the years where it seems like they're really focusing on that, this is where they're getting pulled up on.
And that's it's been arguably the only good thing about COVID is the length of WWE pay-per-views. We had the 2-night WrestleMania, obviously, which was an absolute godsend. Having that 9-hour slog, whatever the hell it is, just chopped in half and put over 2 nights. More of that, please. But yeah, I guess it's just, obviously, you want to see as many wrestlers as possible get on a professional wrestling card because it's good for their careers and their lives. They make more money the more they get shown on television and whatever. But sometimes you just wonder, cut the fat off. Just focus on the stuff that's important. But I guess it's striking that balance. And as I say, if people are going over their time constraints, that's how wrestling works, isn't it? Just stick to the rules.
Stick to the rules.
As Dwight K. Schrute said, learn your rules. You better learn your rules. If you don't, you'll be eaten in your sleep. Hung.
That's
Vince McMahon backstage.
Hum. Complete with sound effect. Let's go to Friday Night SmackDown, where WWE superstar Bayley has very much been a superstar this year. Ross, have you loved the work of Bayley this year?
Bayley has arguably outshone Sasha Banks, which, take your mind back, I don't know, 6 months, if maybe a little bit more, you would think that would be impossible. But being a heel for Bayley, as strange as that sounds, a couple of years ago, a year ago, whatever it might be, she's more natural. And she's just a natural dickhead. She's annoying in the best possible way. Heel Bayley, I'm all for it.
Even more so when the postman arrived at her house last month. Ding dong, hello, here's PW Insider. And you're top of the tree, love. Bayley, number one, as we know, in the women's list of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and Bayley has paid homage to that in such a cool way. And there's a picture on her Twitter which shows this. She has shaved the number one into the back of her head, and I'm hoping that we see some big drop kicks and stuff from Bayley on SmackDown, so we can see that number one shone out for all to see.
This is the thing. I was listening to Bayley's appearance on the New Day podcast recently, and she's actually been doing this for quite some time. She's, I forget the name of the backstage hair cutter at WWE, but basically Bayley's been putting all of her faith in this person to cut her hair and make it look good. She's just been going along with the flow, not really requesting a particular style, just having it done, and then hopefully it looks good. But this getting stuff shaved at the back of her head has been happening for a while. I think she did it for her birthday as well. There was a cake there. And she was saying on the New Day podcast that she's having these really cool, intricate things done in the back of her head. But when she gets in the ring, nobody can see it. So what's the point?
It's nice for us to see, and it's nice to see Bayley getting the nod. It's crazy because when they turned Bayley heel, there was such a part of us that were like, this is wrong because you've got such a natural, organic baby face there that you haven't taken full advantage of. And I remember feeling like trepidatious about it, but it's been the best thing that's happened to her career, just allowing her to unleash that inner Karen. It's just absolutely
haircut as well. It's quite a Karen haircut when you think about it. I think it is anyway. I'm not down with my memes, but yeah, you look at just Bayley on the NXT. Bayley as a babyface was pretty much flawless the entire run from start to finish. But then you look at the main roster, babyface Bayley getting confused how to work a kendo stick or something like that. Remember that one? You maybe think that a heel turn probably had to happen. You're still trepidatious, as you say, about it actually happening, but it has paid off, and she is just. Is she a better heel than a babyface? I would suggest she probably is.
I kind of like to see some multiverse type of affair where we have babyface Bayley versus heel Bayley. Like, that would never happen except in a weird dream I have. But I just think she was so good as a face in NXT. So not so much in WWE, but definitely in NXT. So good as a heel in WWE. But well done, Bayley. Number one. Why try harder?
Did you see the thing that she put on, I think it was in some sort of documentary, where she had written a letter to herself as a child, and then she was responding to that letter today as an adult, going like, we've done all this stuff, we've made history, we're a Triple Crown champion, we've done all this stuff in the women's division. She's just writing back to Pam, baby Pam, as she sat there as the SmackDown, well, maybe she wouldn't have been the champion then, but she's just won everything, and she's sat there writing back to herself in this letter. It's just emotional stuff. She's just as I said, she was like a dickhead in the best possible way. She's also really likable. When you see her just sat there as a grown woman writing this letter to her childhood self, who she'd written the letter to, it's lovely stuff.
It's lovely. And finally, what will become of our boy Babatunde, Ross? That's the ultimate question.
I know the answer, Tom. I know the answer, Tom, before you stop there. It's a leading man in all of the movies, as we saw on the main event.
That is very true. What an actor he is. Unfortunately, there's not much acting from him at the moment, not much of anything of him at the moment. On the subject of guys from Raw Underground, remember that time? PW Insider have said talent from Raw Underground who were drafted to Raw, Dabba Kato and Arturo Huas, have been at Raw tapings in recent weeks, but not used. We are told the feeling is they still need additional seasoning. They are told they need additional seasoning before they are introduced as full-fledged Raw performers. Now, this is where there's some confusion, because we had it on good authority that Arturo Huas not only had an injury that had taken him out of action for a couple of weeks, but had big plans going forward in NXT. But it seems like now plans have changed again, and he's turning up on Raw.
Didn't he have a promo package sort of re-hyping his re-debut, if you want, like last week or 2 weeks ago or something like that?
They did a weird thing, right, where they had like a little 10-second reel of like him looking all tough, like to go. He returns, so he debuts on NXT. He's fighting on NXT next. It wasn't a debut or return. He said fighting on NXT next. And then when they came back from the break, he was already in the ring like a jobber, like Schrodinger's jobber. Like, is he a jobber? Is he not? We don't know. And then he apparently picked up an injury during that match, which meant that any stuff they had taped for him in advance, they just held off on. But him and Dabba Kato being backstage at Raw is interesting. Dabba Kato desperately needs something on Raw, doesn't he, Ross?
I mean, you're thinking about people who apparently these guys need seasoning, but we're looking at Raw and we're seeing Amos, how we pronounce that, AJ Styles' big pal. You're seeing people in Retribution. You're seeing people who arguably still need that same seasoning, but they're in very much a prominent role. So it's all about finding that right spot for these people to allow them to get the training on the job, if you want, to allow them to get that experience and that exposure while appearing on Raw. Why they have to be backstage to do that? That doesn't make much sense to me.
I feel like if they want to use them, they'll find a way to use them.
Exactly,
I think that the additional season thing is a bit of a line. It's like, it puts me in mind, and I only know this off the top of my head because I was writing notes for the Cultaholic Classic Raw review, which is live on Saturday. Like how Macho Man Randy Savage was a wrestling commentator throughout the mid-90s in WWF, because Vince said, no, you're too old to wrestle. I don't want you wrestling. You're too old. Please commentate on this match featuring Nikolai Volkov. And it's like, well, hang on. There's the disconnect here. If they want to use you, they will use you. And for whatever reason, they're dragging their feet on Dabba Kato. And not so much Arturo Huas, because he was doing stuff in NXT, but What would you have Dabba-Kato do?
Eat Retribution.
Yes!
What a way to debut. Straight at the top of the card. That's the thing that came to my mind straight away because, as I say, me and you, Tom, I think it's still on the podcast feed right now. We watched the main event on Netflix, and Dabba-Kato, I forget what his name was in the film. I know that Keith Lee was the smooth operator. I forget what Dabba-Kato's name was, but he was the lead.
I think we just called him Baba Tunde the whole way through.
Yeah, he was the lead and heel, and he worked. So why that couldn't translate to Monday Night Raw, I have no idea, as I speak seriously as a wrestling analyst. Deadly serious here.
Emphasis on the list. Have an amazing Wednesday. How you spend it. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.